Execute a man for killing his 2-year-old daughter 22 years ago. But there have been several court rulings in the past hour or so at the state and federal level. If Roberson dies by lethal injection, he will be the first person in the country put to death over shaken baby syndrome.
But experts say the theory behind it no longer holds up scientifically. An hour ago, a judge granted Texas lawmaker a temporary restraining order so that Roberson could testify at a hearing next week. But the Attorney General's office quickly appealed.
Yeah, we're waiting to see if the execution will proceed as planned at a prison an hour north of Houston. Sydney Percy is live in Huntsville to show us what's happening right now.
Well, Chris, Izzy, I cannot underscore how fluid this situation is, how complicated, and candidly how confusing it is in this moment. As you mentioned, he was scheduled to be executed here at 6 o'clock. It is 6 o'clock on the dot right now. I just spoke with his TDCJ spokeswoman, and she told me his execution has been paused. Not halted, but paused. What does that mean? Well, she said that means execution preparations are still underway. She wouldn't be specific about what those meant, but she said he will not be executed until they get clarity from the courts. As you mentioned, that TRO just came down. We are waiting to find out what happens with an appeal. That TRO, as you talked about, came down after lawmakers last night voted to subpoena Roberson. The concept being, if he was set to testify in Austin on Monday, the state could not go through with the execution. That is how this all came to be. Again, obviously, this is down to the very last minute. Several of those lawmakers are here today, protesters as well in front of the prison. We just heard from one of the lawmakers lobbying for this execution to be halted. Hear from him now.
I am concerned for him, I'm concerned for his family, and I'm also concerned for the precedent that if we execute another innocent man today, what that means for our justice system, and do we even have true justice in this state?
And so, as I mentioned, we don't know what preparations ongoing means. That preparations are ongoing. There's not a ton of clarity other than it's not a halt, it's a pause. That's the spokesperson's words. We do know that the witnesses that would be going in right now for the execution have not been walked into the prison yet. And I just got these documents from a spokesperson as well. I want to read to you what they say. This document lists out the list of witnesses that will be in there if the execution does go through. We know that includes Roberson's wife, friends of his, several public officials, a victim services representative, and also a spiritual advisor. This list right here, if you can see it, this sort of goes through his day-to-day, hour by hour, comings and goings in the prison, essentially. Today, we know this morning he was sleeping early. At 2:30 this morning, Roberson was reading. At 3, he began packing his property, read again at 4 in the morning, was watching TV just before 6 a.m., and then spent the rest of the morning until 11 a.m. speaking with staff, inmates, and visitors. Again, an incredibly fluid situation here in Huntsville. We will be sure to update you throughout the evening. Chris, Izzy.
All right. Thank you, Sydney. We'll check back in with you here before this newscast is over. You know, his appeals are centered on how doctors diagnosed shaken baby syndrome more than 20 years ago. At the time, investigators took it as evidence of abuse rather than symptoms of something else. Texas passed a groundbreaking law 11 years ago, which allows Roberson to challenge that initial conclusion. But as Matt Howerton reports, it hasn't worked in his favor so far.
There's an innocent man who's at risk of being executed.
Robert Roberson faces execution, and there shouldn't be any doubt surrounding his guilt in his 2-year-old daughter's murder, but there is.
And we're hopeful that someone is going to act and stop this.
That's what one of his attorneys, Jane Pucher, believes. She's from the Innocence Project, speaking to us hours before Roberson's scheduled execution, adding that if jurors in 2003 knew what medical experts did now, they may not have sent Roberson to death row or convicted him at all.
She was very, very sick, and he was trying to get her help.
The year before, Roberson showed up to a hospital just a few hours southeast of Dallas with his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki Curtis. The little girl had been very ill in the days prior.
She had rolled out of bed, and when he woke up a couple hours later, Nikki was not responding, and he rushed her to the hospital.
And back then, doctors jumped to conclusions, Pucher said, to a shaken baby hypothesis.
If a child was brought to a hospital and there wasn't an immediate explanation for what happened to them, there was often an assumption that the child had been shaken.
But now doctors don't make that assumption so quickly, Pucher said. The symptoms of shaken baby syndrome can be the result of something else aside from abuse.
Nikki had been been very sick with double pneumonia, with both bacterial and viral pneumonia. That is documented in her lung scans, which showed that she had really no ability to breathe at the time that she died. And that's what caused her to collapse. And when children or anybody are experiencing that kind of oxygen deprivation, it results in bleeding in the body. It's not from abuse, it's not from trauma, it's because that's what happens when your body starts to die. And no jury has heard that.
His fight painting a gray picture for an ending that too many say needs to be black and white. In Dallas, I'm Matt Howerton.